I can see myself, but I don't know if I'm on the screen for you guys.
Yes, you are.
I am. So welcome everybody to something I meant to click. Let's see. Okay. So welcome everyone to the second of this 2-week presentation of a talk and presentation, a bit about the symbolism of Tibetan Buddhist iconography. And I'm going to start by reviewing some of the items that was the foundation for last week, and then we'll move on from that. So, John, I think you have the, pardon me, you have the motivation prayer, the 4-line prayer. Thank you. So when we recite this, or just read it silently, let's try to think of the meaning behind it, not just the literal meaning of the words, but the whole meaning behind why it is that we start events like this, or any event, in fact, which has possibility of creating some kind of virtuous merit. The two elements that are present in this prayer, as I think everyone here knows, is the lines of taking refuge, finding a safe direction in our life, and then 2 lines generating the intention to, by following that direction, to fulfill our highest potential in order to be of maximum benefit to others. Now, the language that's used here is specific to the Buddhist Dharma, but if we come from another background, and I assume that even though everyone here has a connection to a Buddhist center, that you might also have some strong feelings for other spiritual paths, then it isn't too difficult to translate what is mentioned here in Buddhist terms into whatever would be workable to the background that your own spiritual practice has. Because refuge is what you can trust in, what it is that you can receive valid, reliable, inspiring information and direction from. So, for example, if a person were strongly Catholic, for example, just to take one example, then because of your study and practice and the culture you were brought up in, then figures such as Jesus and Mary remind us of these qualities of love and compassion and benefit. And so when in Buddhism they talk about the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, you could translate that into the spiritual community that turns into the direction of the Christian saints for guidance. And then the second part, the generating the bodhicitta, that's specifically referring to the wish that oneself achieves the full enlightenment of Buddhahood. But if those terms don't speak to us individually very, very powerfully, we all feel that we have a potential to grow, to expand our understanding, to deepen our sympathy for others, and so forth. In other words, a fulfillment of our highest human potential, whatever we perceive that to be. In Mahayana Buddhism, the highest Buddhist human potential is to actually become a fully awakened being ourselves. however you understand that, however you understand the fulfillment of your highest potential, then you can think of those when the last two lines are being recited. In other words, you don't have to take the words literally if they don't convey that much meaning to you, but you should be able to find out in your own experience what does have meaning for you. Like, what does offer safety in this world and guidance? That's the refuge. For what purpose are we engaging in any kind of positive action? Well, part of it is that we wish to be happy, we wish to be safe, we wish to evolve, but we understand no matter what background we come from, our own welfare just by itself is minuscule compared to the benefit of the countless millions and billions and trillions of other beings who, just like ourselves, only wish to be happy and to wish to avoid suffering. So if we keep into mind, if we bear in mind the deeper meaning of what it means to take refuge and to fulfill our highest potential, then let that be the motivation for even this present action that we're engaged in. In this next hour and a half, I'll probably be the one who does the vast majority of the speaking, but hopefully all of us will be doing some thinking during that. You know? Though I know for myself, a lot of times I speak without thinking, I try to keep the thinking and the speaking somehow aligned together. So even if you're remaining silent, inside, if you're weighing the meaning of the words or the images that are being explained, and if they resonate on some level, or if they bring to mind some question that you'd like to pursue, or opens an avenue to further understanding, well, just the very fact that we're spending, the better part of an hour and a half trying to get closer to these things which have a real importance, that aren't just a temporary fad in our life, or but has a deep, abiding meaning. If we bring that to mind, that it ensures that whatever we do here is going to have a positive result, a beneficial result. So let's just start by sitting for a moment. And I always find it helpful to take one or two cleansing breaths to calm and focus the mind. And the most important thing is to recognize that we're not alone in our wish to be happy and avoid suffering. So whatever it is that we deeply wish for in the bottom of our heart, peace, safety, fulfillment, companionship, throughout this world, there's countless other beings who have the same exact wish. So if this hour and a half that we're going to spend together has any benefit, let it be beneficial not only for me, myself, but for all the other beings on this planet who, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, in a very real sense, are all members of one family, all wishing to be happy, all wishing to be free from suffering and to have lives which are completely interdependent upon one another. None of us is a separate island unto ourselves, but our welfare is intimately tied up with the welfare of all other beings. So with that thought in mind, either reciting the prayer out loud if you wish, or mentally, or just thinking about the overriding meaning of these 4 lines, you can recite this prayer for generating refuge, taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. And the way I prefer to do it here is to recite each of the first 3 lines once, and the last line, cultivating this compassionate bodhicitta motivation, I recite 3 times slowly. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. May I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. May I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, thank you. Now, so we can, John, I think I'll just call out the IM number for each of the images that I want to talk about. So we can just start with IM 1. I think that was 2. There's 1. Good. All right. So as probably everyone here knows, this is Lama Thupten Yeshe, and it was through his inspiration predominantly that my mind turned to, and not only my mind, but the mind of hundreds or thousands of other beings turned in the direction of the Buddha Dharma. And it wasn't simply through his teachings, but through his very joyous, concentrated, loving presence that it made us realize these teachings are something meant to be practiced and realized because they produce such extraordinary results. And that now, image number 2, please, John. Okay. So here, of course, is Shakyamuni Buddha. It is said that during the present world age that we all occupy, 1,000 founding Buddhas will appear. A founding Buddha, by the way, there's many more Buddhas that do appear during this age, but a founding Buddha is someone who brings it into existence after it has disappeared or degenerated. So Shakyamuni Buddha was the 4th of these 1,000, and the 5th one, who will be coming in undetermined period of time. It's probably measured in at least hundreds, if not thousands of years, will be Maitreya Buddha. Now we're living in the age of Shakyamuni Buddha. And this image, which I talked about last time more extensively, but I'm just going to briefly review some of the salient features now. This image, if we can interpret the symbolism of it, it tells us a lot about what the path to full enlightenment is like and how it manifests itself. So the Buddha is seated on a specially prepared seat that has 3 major elements to it: the lotus, the sun, and the moon disk, which are like cushions on top of it. And the lotus is very easy for any of us to see. And the moon disk on top, which is white, is quite easy to see. But you have to have a very sharp vision to be able to see the golden yellow sun disk in between. Actually, I tried to figure out a way of making a enlarged image of this, in which that would be able to we'd be able to see it more clearly, but I ran into some technical difficulties, so I've just leave it the way it is. Last time I mentioned that the lotus, sun, and moon, respectively, are what are often referred to as the three principal aspects of the path leading to enlightenment. So the lotus represents what is often referred to as renunciation, but which more properly should be understood to be the definite decision to emerge from cyclic existence. In other words, to emerge from an existence which is based on the delusions, the afflictions, predominantly of ignorance, attachment, and hatred, which lead to the creation of harmful actions which cause suffering in their wake. So just as a lotus will emerge from a swampy area and then open its flowers up immaculately, so too someone motivated to attain the full enlightenment of Buddhahood for the sake of benefiting others is like a beautiful flower emerging from the swamp of the delusions and negative karma to experience the fulfillment of his or her highest potential. So the lotus is this definite emergence or renunciation, and the sun and the moon represent the cultivation first of the illumination of insightful wisdom, that's the sun, and the moon of the compassionate method. I've heard it explained, at least from a mythological point of view, or maybe there's something on the subtle level which is also true, but I'm not sure about that. We all know that the sun shines with a light of heat, of warmth. But according to these teachings, the moon's light shines with a cooling light. In fact, one of my teachers said that in Tibet, if someone was experiencing tremendous difficulties, if they were sort of on fire with passions or confusions, that one of the things they would sometimes do is put that person out in the moonlight, that the moon has this ability to assuage or calm this fever, the fever of the delusions, the fever of the suffering. So the sun is the illuminator, the warmth and the illumination symbolizes wisdom, which eliminates the darkness of ignorance, and the moon, which calms the passions and the defilements, is the compassionate bodhicitta motivation based on loving kindness and compassion and generating that wish to attain enlightenment for the sake of helping others. So these three form the three principal aspects of the sutra path to enlightenment. And then seated on top of this specially prepared seat is the culmination or the effect of practicing those three principal aspects of the path, the fulfillment of our highest potential. And so this is depicted by an image of Shakyamuni Buddha himself. And the posture that he's in, the cross-legged posture, and the shows his adamantine, unshaking resolve. And his right hand is in what's known as the earth-touching mudra, or the earth-touching gesture. And this actually relates to a very specific event in the life of Buddha. When he was 35 years old, or after living a life of luxury in the palace of his parents, and then spending 6 years in a isolated retreat, following ascetic practices, he made the determination to follow a middle path between self-indulgence and asceticism. He took his seat underneath the Bodhi tree, and as he sat down, he was attacked by all of the delusions that pollute the minds of beings, of unenlightened beings, and cause us suffering and misery. So this is explained in pictures very dramatically. There's a whole army attacking Shakyamuni, trying to disturb his meditation. And none of these attacks from outside worked. But you know, a meditator can also be attacked from the inside by his or her doubts as to whether that person is actually qualified to attain enlightenment or not, whether that person has done enough positive, virtuous actions during their life that merits their ability to be able to win such a high goal. So in the story of Buddha, the last attack was made by the demonic force known as Mara, or the interferences. And in that last attack, Mara was trying to generate a sense of doubt that Shakyamuni, well, I should actually refer to him by his pre-Buddha name, that Siddhartha, Prince Siddhartha, was not worthy to attain enlightenment because, after all, what had he done? He had wasted the first 29 years of his life in sensory delight, and then he wasted the next 6 years of his life in starvation, and now he was reduced to just little more than a living skeleton. And so Mara was mocking him and saying, you think after those 35 years of doing nothing but either feeding yourself or starving yourself, that you are worthy to succeed where so many others have failed on this task? And then Mara said, I demand you show me one witness who can testify that you're worthy of succeeding on this great enterprise. And so Shakyamuni answered that question non-verbally. Up to this point, he'd been sitting together with his hands in meditation pose. But he left his left hand on his lap, and then he reached out his right hand and touched the earth beneath his right knee, symbolically calling upon the earth itself as a witness that this was not the first time he had followed the spiritual path. He hadn't just been following it for the last 35 years or the last few lifetimes, but countless lifetimes during which he practiced all the various perfections of generosity, patience, concentration, wisdom, ethics, and the like. And the earth was his witness. According to some stories, the earth shook when Shakyamuni did that. According to other sources, the earth split open and the earth goddess appeared and testified on his behalf. But whether any of these things happened externally or not, this was certainly internally the realization that Siddhartha had. And so this earth-touching posture is a fearless posture, showing that he was worthy to succeed, that he had created the various causes. And indeed, after one long night, the next morning when he arose, he was no longer simply ex-Prince Siddhartha, but he was now a fully awakened being. And as such, he had the fearless to know that his teachings were correct, to know that if people followed the teachings, they would attain the same realizations that he did. And these fearless, there's actually 4 qualities of fearlessness. And these are also symbolized by the lion throne on which he sits. You only see 2 lions there, right? But each corner has 2 lions, and there are 4 corners. So there's 8 altogether. So 4 pairs of 2 lions apiece. And they are said to be supporting the throne on which the Buddha sits. And half of those lions are looking up to protect from interferences coming from above, and half are looking below to protect against influences coming from below. And in that respect, they indicate the fearlessness with which a Buddha can teach, because he or she has had the direct experience of knowing the truth of what they're speaking about. It's not just an academic speculation, but with the wisdom eyes being able to see all of that. So there are many, many more individual elements that could be talked about even in just this one image. There are various items of offering, for example, in front of the Buddha. And if we have enough time towards the end of this presentation, I'll have something to say about those offerings. But right now, I'd like to move to the next slide, number 3. So after Buddha attained, after, maybe the best way of saying it is, after he manifested his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, he went to find the 5 former companions who had shared his 6-year austerities with him, realizing that they would be ripe to understand the teachings he had to give them. So he made his way to the deer park in Sarnath. And as I mentioned last time, his 5 former companions, when they saw him coming, they wanted to give him the cold shoulder, thinking he had given up the path that leads to full awakening, that he had reverted. But as he approached, they could see an extraordinary change had come over, an extraordinary transformation, even before he began to speak, just the way he stood and walked and gestured, just his calmness, just his aura. All of these were indications that a tremendous transformation had taken place. By the way, at this point, I'd like to bring in something from another direction to illustrate this. As everyone here, I believe, knows, it was just a few days ago that the great the Vietnamese Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh, passed away. And one of the great qualities that Thich Nhat Hanh had that he shared with other great adepts was that his very presence was calming. Just the way he sat, the way he gestured, the way he moved. All of these were teachings because they were such outward signs and expressions of his inward calm and focus and clarity. So we see people even nowadays who have qualities that are impressive, which can be wordlessly impressive of their spiritual attainments, in the same way that Shakyamuni was 2,500 years ago. And there's a number of beings like that I could mention, but in honor of Thich Nhat Hanh, to me, he seemed to be a great exemplar of this quality. But now, returning to Sarnath of 2,500 years ago, they asked him to give a teaching of what he had experienced. And in that teaching, he started out by recommending the middle way between self-indulgence and self-denial. And then he presented the Four Noble Truths, the four facts seen as true by the noble Arya beings who've gained a direct insight into reality. And so these are the reality of suffering or dissatisfaction, the unsatisfactory nature of unenlightened existence. The second noble truth, that this is not a random experience. It didn't happen for no reason. It didn't happen for a false reason, such as we're being punished by some exterior being, and that's why suffering arises. No, the second noble truth of suffering indicates that the root cause of that suffering is within ourselves. It's within our the delusions based on ignorance, which put us out of sync with the ultimate nature of reality and is responsible for suffering and dissatisfaction. And then the third noble truth, based on his own experience, Buddha declared, this suffering, even though it has been in existence from time without beginning for each individual unenlightened being, can be brought to an end. There is cessation of suffering. And then in the fourth noble truth, he outlined the eightfold path that leads to this cessation of suffering. I think I indicated last time that it's very helpful to think of the eightfold path leading to the cessation of suffering in terms of the three higher trainings that embody them. So there is the training in higher ethical discipline or higher morality. So if we want to overcome suffering, we have to avoid creating the causes for it. In other words, the negative, harmful actions of body, speech, and mind. And they themselves arise from having a mistaken notion of the nature of reality, seeing things having a kind of a concrete self-existence, and hence following the pathways of aversion for things that we don't like and desirous attachment for the things that we do like, exaggerating the qualities of each and getting further and further from the nature of reality by doing so. So there's the training in higher morality or ethical discipline. And then on top of that, the training in higher concentration. And finally, the training in higher wisdom. And some of you may have heard this analogy before, but that path of combining those three higher trainings to gain liberation from the suffering of unsatisfactory cyclic existence is sometimes likened to what a person might do if he or she discovered that the tree in the backyard where their family lives is actually a poisonous tree, and wishing to save himself and the rest of the family from the dangers of that tree, he would prune back the branches so the fruit would not grow. Well, that's a temporary solution, because as long as the tree remains alive, those branches and hence the fruit will regenerate themselves after a while. So if you really wanted to be free from suffering and dissatisfaction, not only temporarily, like when we take an aspirin from a headache, But if we want to be completely free from that suffering, now and forever, we have to cut through the trunk of the tree that produces that suffering. So how do we cut through that tree? Well, we need a sharp axe. But the sharp axe itself won't cut the tree if we don't have the bodily strength to wield that axe and hit the same spot in the trunk again and again. But if we do have that, if we have a good aim and enough strength to hold and swing the axe with strength, then we can definitely cut through the tree, and there's no longer any danger that that tree will produce any more poison. So in a similar fashion, if we wish to gain freedom, liberation from samsaric or cyclic existence, suffering, the whole syndrome which causes and perpetuates suffering into satisfaction, then we need the strength that comes with moral discipline. There are a lot of people who are quite brilliant, and they can come up with very clear, insightful understandings of things, but their behavior is so dissolute. They're so caught up in drugs or alcohol or other kinds of self-destructive behavior that those insights never lead anywhere. They never become penetrating, and in fact are very often soon forgotten. So the first higher training is to be able to develop that single-pointedness of attention. Pardon me, I skipped over. The first point is to engage in moral, ethical discipline, which gives us the strength to hold and wield the axe. And then the axe itself has to be sharp. So that's analogous to the wisdom which sees the nature of reality and can apply it again and again, for example, in investigation, to see what is true and what is not true about our own sense of ego identity. And then the end result, by having a combination of the strength that's given to us by moral discipline and the good aim, which is given to us by being able to wield the axe accurately and hitting the same spot again and again. Then we have the axe of wisdom, the insight into the nature of reality. So if we practice those three higher trainings in conjunction with one another, then we can definitely, according to these teachings, we can definitely cut through the trunk of suffering and achieve a liberation from it entirely. So that's a way of talking about the Eightfold Path in terms of the three higher trainings into which they feed. Now, the next slide, number 4, we talked about last time to some extent. And I wonder if there's anyone who feels confident to say what the three animals in the center of this diagram, known as the wheel of life, represent. And I hasten to add that though this diagram is called the wheel of life, it is not the wheel of all life. It's not the wheel of enlightened life. It's the wheel of life in the nature of suffering and dissatisfaction. And so there are three poisons which contaminate this ordinary, let's say, worldly life, and they are represented by these three animals. So if anyone feels they want to just repeat what these three are, you're welcome to do that.
I believe I can do that.
Yes.
So the pig represents ignorance, and out of the mouth of the pig comes attachment and aversion, And so the bird would be attachment, and the snake would be aversion.
That's excellent. And I couldn't see it on my screen, but what's your name, dear?
Jana.
Jana. Excellent.
Mhm.
And I have a further question. How is it that both aversion and attachment, desirous attachment, arise from ignorance? What is the connection?
Well, it's because the ignorance is what keeps us from seeing, it keeps us in wrong view. So the ignorance keeps us from seeing things as they really exist. And that's where the ignorance and the attachment come from, I think.
No, that's excellent. That's excellent. By the way, I'm not commending you for my own experience. It's just from all the teachings I myself have heard. I got plenty of pig, snake, and bird in me.
Me too.
But that's true. One of the ways that my various teachers have pointed out in a lot of the reading that I've done is that ignorance sees things in a separate, independent way, as if it was self-contained, whatever we're thinking about. So, for example, if I'm thinking about myself, which happens a lot, right? With an ignorant view, I don't see the way my being interrelates with all other forces in the universe. I think instead that my identity is as a concrete, separate, independently existing me, like that. That's the view, right? And with that view, I tend to exaggerate whatever I encounter. In other words, if I encounter something which is pleasant, I don't simply think, oh, that was nice. I exaggerate it, thinking, that's nice, that's very nice. I want it, I have to have it, like that. That's the direction that the exaggeration goes in. And pretty soon, instead of just seeing something which is nice and appealing, we see something that we have to possess. And we have to possess, even if possessing it means to knocking over somebody else who wants it, or stealing it, or in some cases, even killing for it. So there's nothing wrong with seeing something pleasant as pleasant. But once we exaggerate it to this extent as something that my supposedly concrete ego identity needs for my very existence, then attachment arises almost automatically. And then the same thing is true, but in the opposite direction for things that we don't like. A person, I like using this example because for me it's so strange. But I like the example anyway, so I'm going to use it again. There are certain people like me who are kind of sloppy in their dress and don't really care much about it. There's other people whose whole sense of identity is based on what they're wearing and how they appear. Right? High fashion plate type people. So if you were to say to me, oh, that sweater you're wearing, John, is really old and ratty, why don't you get a new one? I'd probably say, yeah, you're right, but it's comfortable. So I just wear it. But if you were to give a slight indication to someone who really identified with their appearance, their outward appearance, and you were to say something very, very mild, like if you were to point out, oh, there's a piece of lint on your jacket, or oh, the wind mussed your hair. Your hair isn't perfectly combed anymore. Just very small things like that, that most people would not react to if those comments were addressed to someone who happened to have his or her ego identity fixated on this outward appearance. These tiny remarks, which would hardly bother most people, would be a tremendous insult, be a tremendous attack, as if they were being attacked by weapons. And the reaction to that would be to cultivate dislike, anger, even hatred towards the person who pointed out this unwanted truth to them. So because ignorance exaggerates the isolated, self-existent nature of oneself, of one's ego identity, if that ego identity is harmed by something that is said that points out a fault in our appearance, then hatred arises. And on the other hand, if something appears in the environment that looks like something I would really like to have, I need to have, I must have to support my ego identity, then the person would be willing to engage in all kinds of negative attitude, negative destructive behavior in order to get it. They would kill, lie, steal in order to get what it is that they want. So I purposely used a very kind of almost silly example, right? But all around us, both on the individual level, on the level of a family, on the level of nations, there is so much strife because beings looking at one another as self-contained concrete entities exaggerate what appears to them to be positive to such an extent that they would engage in destructive actions to get it, and to in terms of things that they don't like, then cultivating this strong aversion leading to hatred. So from these attitudes, these exaggerated attitudes, this becomes the force behind the karma we create. So this picture of the wheel of life is the kind of life that's generated by beings who are holding on to the concrete self-existent entity of their ego identity, and by extension are projecting it outwards into other phenomena as well. So what you said, Jana, was perfectly correct. These are the three root delusions, sometimes known as the three poisons, which are the main causes giving rise to the negative actions of body, speech, and mind, which giving harm to others has the karmic consequence of creating harm for oneself and leading to unwanted suffering. So this, in a way, though the Buddha taught many things in his first teachings, these Four Noble Truths, giving the outline of the way ignorance and the rest of the delusions become the cause for creating harm and thereby experiencing harm as the karmic result. This is fundamental to the teachings of Buddha. And so the five disciples, his five first disciples who were his former companions, when they heard this teaching, starting with one of them, but eventually the realization reached all five of them, was that the true enemy, our true enemy, are these delusions. And by cutting through them, especially cutting through ignorance, this self-grasping ignorance, we can rid ourselves of these foes, these enemies, these delusions. And once we do that, we become what's known as a foe destroyer, someone who has destroyed the inner enemy, a foe destroyer. And I wonder if anyone here knows what the Sanskrit word for a foe destroyer is, someone who's overcome these inner enemies. I'm sure everyone here has heard this word, but you might not have related it to this etymology of a foe destroyer.
Shravaka?
That's in the right direction. Yeah. But a Shravaka perhaps has not yet developed the full realization of it. But if he or she has, then he becomes a Shravaka blank. And the word I'm looking for is in the blank. A Shravaka what? Shravaka foe destroyer.
An arhat?
Yeah, very good. Very good. Go to the head of the class. Yeah. An arhat. Arhat, according to certain etymologies, means a foe destroyer, I mean, someone who has uprooted the delusions. Shravaka just means a hearer, someone who's engaged in hearing, listening to, reading about, becoming familiar with the teachings. You know, in the old days, you couldn't read about the teachings. The only way of receiving them was by listening to them. But after several hundred years, after the teachings started to be written down, then hearing included becoming acquainted with the Dharma by reading and hearing. So Shravaka is someone who's a hearer, and when the Shravaka, having heard the teachings, is able by degrees to reduce and eventually eliminate the strength of these three root delusions, he or she has become an arhat, a foe destroyer. Okay. And so the next image, number 5, is just one illustration of a foe destroyer. Very often the arhats are depicted as being like you don't see arhats wearing jewelry or fine clothing. You know, usually they're just dressed in robes like this, and maybe they've let their hair grow and beard grow, and they're usually depicted as being very kind of self-contained and quiet and concentrated. So this is a picture of a arhat known as Lam Chung, or small path. And his story is quite interesting, but if I were to go into it now, it would take the whole rest of our time. So I'm just going to leave you with the name Lam Chung. But later on, for those who are interested, I can put down references to where all of these things can be found, so you can read any of the things that I just give short shrift to. So one of the paths of people, beings who followed the Buddhist path in the beginning of his career, were these Shravakas, the ones who were aiming to become arhats, aim to become free from samsara, or another way of putting free from samsara is to attain nirvana. So nirvana is not a place. Nirvana is a state of mind in which all of these delusions have been quelled and eliminated. And therefore, since there's no longer any cause for the creation of suffering and dissatisfaction, the arhat stays in a state of peace. Okay. But there were other disciples of the Buddha, not as numerous as the arhats, but very significant among the disciples of Shakyamuni. And they followed a path which, though based on the same insights as the arhat's path, goes farther than that. And so to illustrate that, I have the slide I am number 6. Okay. So I think a lot of people here recognize this figure. So this is in Sanskrit is referred to as Avalokiteshvara, or Tibetan is referred to as Chenrezig, the one who looks upon the world with the eyes of compassion. And you'll see already from the outward appearance, such a being is quite different from the Arhat. First of all, is colorful, is robed in silks, has jewelry. There's so many different elements, in this case, of this male figure's qualities, which indicate that he is moved beyond the approach of an arhat. And just to show that this is not sex determined in any way, let's look at figure number 7. And this is arguably one of the most beloved, along with Chenrezig, of all the figures representing this aspect of the spiritual path. So if someone asked you, I see Chenrezig and Tara, this is of course Mother Tara, Chenrezig and Tara, they look very different from the arhats that were pictured before. What do they represent? What type of beings are they? What kind of response might you give, a brief response as to what unites both Tara and Chenrezig and other figures of their type, and makes them special and differentiates them from the hearer who is aiming for self-liberation from samsara. And maybe this time, if there's someone who hasn't answered before, who feels confident to do it, I'd love to hear from you. I'll give you a hint. The term I'm looking for is a term that you hear probably every day that you're in a Buddhist teaching, especially in a center like the one in Taos.
Are they bodhisattvas?
Exactly. They are bodhisattvas, because a bodhisattva is a being, and that's all that sattva means in this etymology. Sattva is a being, but a being who's not aimed at self-liberation. What is he or she aiming for? The first syllables of the name bodhisattva is bodhi. So instead of being let's say, I'm going to make up a word here, instead of being a nirvana sattva, in other words, someone who's aiming to experience liberation from suffering for himself or herself alone, is aiming instead to achieve bodhi, the full enlightenment of Buddhahood, for the sake of benefiting others. And anyone who has developed that wish, that intention, to the point where it arises spontaneously, is now a bodhisattva. And among Buddha's circle of disciples, there were a number of very important bodhisattvas. For example, there was Manjushri and Vajrapani and Maitreya and Samantabhadra and a whole host of other ones. Okay, and so they were sometimes referred to as the prince or princesses of the Buddha. Because, if, let's say a person is a monarch, a king or a queen, and has children, well, the children of that monarch is destined to become a monarch himself or herself. So a son is a prince destined to become a king, and a daughter is a princess destined or having the potential to become the queen. Right? So the same is true for bodhisattvas. The bodhisattvas are like heirs to the Buddha. They don't simply attain liberation from suffering, but they themselves, after long, arduous practice, become Buddha. They fulfill their own Buddha nature. So both Chenresig and Tara represent this aspiration to full enlightenment. And again, their symbolism is very, very detailed. There's a lot to be said about it, but just looking at this one picture, this Tara is wearing a crown, and you can see set in it are 5 jewels. There's one in the middle, right on the top, and then there's 2 on the left and 2 more on the right. And these jewels, the color is not so well differentiated in this particular picture, but sometimes you'll see that the jewels are different colors. And in that case, very, very often, though not always, the central jewel is red in color. It's red. And I'll explain about that in a moment, because each of those jewels stands for the head of the different Buddha families. The different enlightened beings are grouped in terms of these different families of qualities. And the family to which both Tara and Chenresig belong is the lotus family, the lotus family. And I wonder if anyone knows what the particular quality of the lotus family is when it comes to families of bodhisattvas. You might not know this, but if anyone feels you know the answer to that, then please share it with us. What does the lotus family specifically relate to? Well, one way of thinking about it is when you think of Tara, and you think of Chenresig, what kind of quality, what is the nature of that particular manifestation of enlightened energy? For example, would you say that this is predominantly a fierce energy or a gentle energy? What do you think?
Would it be compassion?
Exactly. Yeah, it's compassion, loving kindness, compassion. In fact, and actually, let me just skip ahead first to the slide number 8, which shows Tara in a nice manifestation. So here you see Tara. And then to give, kind of to bring it home a little bit more, go to image number 9. So I'm not going to ask you who this being is, because I'm sure you all know. For me, myself, even though there are so many beautiful images of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, one of the reasons that this particular one speaks to me so strongly is because the expression on his face, to me, speaks of concentration and clarity, a focus of attention, and an extraordinary softness, looking at us with the eyes of compassion, just as Chenresig is meant to do. So to me, although one can see all kinds of extraordinary qualities in almost any picture one can see of the Dalai Lama or any of the other high beings, this one seems to merge these qualities of what we might call male and female compassion. To such an extent, for example, that there are a lot of images which are, in fact, images of Chenresig, which is a male figure, but they're so soft and they're so gentle looking that many times people think, oh, that's a female. Have you ever had that experience? Like there's this one very famous statue on the side of the stupa in Bodh Gaya, and everybody who goes assumes that it's Tara because it looks like Tara, it looks like a female, right? But in fact, it's a manifestation of Chenrezig, the Buddha of the male Buddha of compassion. So in fact, there on the interior level, there's no ultimate difference between whether you view the Bodhisattva in a male manifestation or a female manifestation, because as is said in the teachings, these are just a conventional distinction. It has nothing to do with the color or the flavor of the mind or the heart that's on the inside. And historically, something very interesting happened. And I'll ask this again for anyone who might know the answer to it. If we move away from Tibetan Buddhism for a while and think of the Buddhism in Far Eastern countries, such as Japan and Korea, like that, there is one very, very beloved figure, as beloved in their tradition as Tara or Chenrezig would be in the Tibetan tradition. And we know her by the Chinese or Japanese version of her name. Does anybody know who I'm referring to? This figure of loving kindness and compassion in Far Eastern Buddhism.
Kuan Yin.
Kuan Yin, exactly, Kuan Yin. And what's really interesting is if you were to ask 1,000 people if Kuan Yin is male or female, the vast majority would say what? What do you think? From your knowledge of Kuan Yin, of seeing
Female.
statues. Could you say again, please?
Female.
Female, right, right. In fact, there's many, many beautiful images of her. But in fact, according to all of the historical records, the earliest manifestations which were called Kuan Yin were actually of the male bodhisattva. So somehow, when Buddhism moved from India to the Far East, there was a sex change operation that took place. And the being that was initially worshipped as a male being started to become more identified as a female being. It wasn't that case in the beginning, but it became that way. And I was told, and I think it's accurate, but I can't swear to it. The reason for that was that in those Far Eastern countries, there were forms of spiritually evolved beings in female form who were very, very popular and who were worshipped and thought about kindly because of their compassionate nature. So when Buddhism reached those countries, even though the figure of the Bodhisattva of compassion was seen as male, very quickly that same figure took on the characteristics of the female spirit or being or goddess, which was already recognized by that culture as having those same qualities. So nowadays, most people, when they think of Kuan Yin, the image of a female comes to mind, but it wasn't always that way. And I remember when I first heard about that, I was actually a student in college, and the professor pointed that out. He himself was a great Chinese scholar. And when he pointed that out, I thought, how amazing that the people could have such a fluid mind, such a non-sectarian type of mind, that something that they received that was male, they have no problem seeing as female, and vice versa. And to my mind, that was really a great liberation, because if you go back a few years, it's started to change now. But if you go back within living memory, if you referred to, let's say, the God of the Abrahamic religions, God the Father or Jehovah or any of those, the pronoun that would go together with that creator being would be male, right? God would be male. And if someone would say God was female, you could have rocks thrown at you. In my lifetime, that has started to change. And people are referring to the Godhead in both male and female forms. But that was not always the case. I'm old enough to remember when it was very rare to happen. And you could be accused of blasphemy or heresy if you used a female pronoun to refer to a male God figure. But here was this whole area in a whole part of the globe, quite distant from where we are now, in which there was apparently no difficulty at all in being able to see that the outward show doesn't indicate the inner reality. I'm going to have to give myself a 1 or 2 minute break because I have a machine here which is starting to malfunction. So let me finish it. By the way, let's do a time check, because I haven't been able to pay attention. It's 6. Oh, we only have about 15 minutes left, don't we? Okay. Well, tell you what, if you don't mind, I'll forget about this malfunctioning. It's not affecting the main computer I'm using now. Let's try to cover a few more of these images just to give a taste. Okay. So the figure after number 11 is Holiness the Dalai Lama. No, I'm counting wrong. After 9, the Dalai Lama, is 10, which is Amitabha. So Amitabha is the head of that family that I talked about, the Lotus family, to which both Chenrezig and Tara belong. And when I mentioned before that very often the central gem on the crown of a bodhisattva of this family is red, because that red stands for Amitabha. And so very often the predominant jewel of their crown is red for Amitabha. And then there are some cases where if the statue or the painting is big enough, that instead of having just a jewel there representing Amitabha, they'll actually have a painting or a picture of Amitabha. And in a sense, in a very real sense, then, it is that Chenrezig and Tara are the disciples, and their guru is Amitabha. And out of respect, they hold Amitabha on the crown of their head. And there are certain prayers which indicate that. For example, some of you recite the prayer of the 21 Taras. One of the Taras, at the moment I've forgotten which number it is, it might be 13, but I'm not sure. She is described as the Tara who wears Amitabha in the crown of her head. So compassion can be viewed as a peaceful male or a peaceful female figure, but it doesn't even have to be peaceful. Let's turn to briefly to figure number 11. So now a lot of people who come upon a figure like this without any prior instruction, when they'd be asked, well, what does this represent? They would say, oh, that's a fierce devil, that's a ghost, that's a, because it's so malevolent looking, right? But in fact, this is Mahakala, who's simply another transformation of Chenresig's compassionate energy. So why would compassion manifest in a fierce form? And this is very fierce. Not only is Mahakala having a wrathful expression, not only is his headgear made not out of jewels, but out of skulls, not only is he surrounded by flames instead of a gentle aura, not only that, but everything about him depicts a fierce energy. So does anyone feel confident of explaining why and how compassion can manifest as a fierce, even violent energy? How do we make sense out of that? I should point out that in the beginning, when Westerners went into Tibet for the first time and they saw images like that, the way they figured it out was, oh, Tibetan Buddhism is devil worship. That was their conclusion. And the first books that were published basically repeated that same story over and over again. The most popular of those early books by a teacher named Waddell said that very, very explicitly. And that was the information that got into the Encyclopedia Britannica. But it's all mistaken. Mahakala is not a devil. He's not the bad guy. He's inseparable from Chenresig. He's the same family as Tara. So how is that possible? How do we explain that?
Does he represent the intense energy and commitment that it takes to destroy ignorance?
Very, very good answer. Very, very good answer. Yeah. I think all of the answers to that question come back to why it is that sometimes at different points in the spiritual path, you need a particularly powerful energy. The answer you gave was that you need it just to simply overcome the inertia of ignorance, right? But we can even think of it in other terms, not even going that far. For example, a bodhisattva is interested in helping others on their path to enlightenment. And if they see someone who's gentle and kind, they have no problem speaking to them in a kind, gentle manner. But what about they meet someone who's engaged in heavy-duty negativity, right? Or is engaged in behavior which is extremely dangerous to themselves and others. So the bodhisattva is like a father or a mother. And if you're a father or a mother and you have a little child that you love dearly, and the child runs out into the street and is in danger of being run over by a truck, does that skillful mother or father use a very calm, sweet tone of voice and say, oh, my darling, please come out of the road. I would hate to see you turned into road pizza, Don't be run over, come out, please. What mother or father would address the beloved child in those terms? None. Because the parent would be so worried about what was about to happen to the child that he or she would do anything, no matter how violent it looked, to get the child out of the road as quickly as possible. This could be yelling at it, throwing a rock at it, whatever it is. Right? So the outward action of yelling or throwing something as if it was a weapon just to frighten the child to get out of the road. It looks harmful, but the intention behind it is only compassion. So there are many instances in which a gentle, peaceful activity isn't going to have the beneficial effect that a fierce activity will. Of course, you have to be able to have a lot of skill. You have to have a great deal of skill to be able to use a fierce activity, because it could easily become a harmful activity itself. Like if if instead of yelling at the child, you were to throw something at it, you better be sure that what you're throwing isn't actually going to hit the child. You just want to scare it so it runs out of the road, right? So the same thing. A bodhisattva is interested in the welfare of all beings, whether they're engaged in positive or negative actions, whether they're manifesting in a gentle or in a fierce manner. And for those beings who can't be helped by a gentle approach, a peaceful approach, then there is a wrathful approach. And Mahakala represents, in part, the manifestation of this wrathful approach of compassion in order to be of maximum benefit to those beings who cannot be tamed by a softer, gentler method. I was hoping I'd get a little bit further this time. Well, I got further than I did last week, but there still remains a few things. And tell you what, just as a little appetizer, I'm just going to go through each of the remaining ones and just say one or two words about each one, and then we can bring the session to a close. So that was 11. 12 is also Amitabha. There was a reason I did it twice, but I don't need to explain that now. I'm sorry, 12 was Amitabha again. 13, that is also Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion, but in this is not in the simpler 4-arm version that we saw before, but the 1,000-arm version. And there's a lot that could be said about the symbolism of that. I'll just say what Lama Yeshe mentioned in one of his teachings. He said, why would we want to envision ourselves as a deity with 11 heads and 1,000 arms? What's the use of having 1,000 arms? And he said, it's to reach out in all directions to help 1,000 different beings. And all of the symbolism of a figure like this, from the color of the 11 faces and the number of hands and so forth, depict the widespread action of the Buddha of compassion, Chenrezig. Then there are two more bodhisattvas that are of particular importance for our approach here. So number 14 shows Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, and it's the sword of wisdom that he holds in his right hand, and the Prajnaparamita Sutra, which is the text of wisdom, in his left hand. And then the next figure, number 15, is Vajrapani, another figure representing wrathful power. So the reason I mention these two is because along with Chenrezig, these two figures represent three qualities that are often depicted as emergent qualities of a bodhisattva. So in addition to having the loving kindness and compassion symbolized by Chenrezig, there is the Manjushri, which symbolizes the wisdom, and the Vajrapani, which symbolizes power or skillful means. And some of you are familiar with, probably everyone here, I guess, is familiar with the next figure, the last one I'll speak about, number 16, which is Jade Tsongkhapa. The Guru Yoga practices in this tradition focus on Je Rinpoche, who was one of the disciples chief disciples of the very first Dalai Lama about 600 years ago, and two of his own disciples, Gyaltsab Che and Khedrub Che. And very often when we're doing a guru yoga, focusing on our own teacher, we view Tsongkhapa, the central figure here, as being inseparable from our guru. And then at his crown is Manjushri, or a figure in the golden color of Manjushri, representing wisdom. And in his throat, a red figure symbolizing Chenresi, the power of enlightened speech. And then in the heart, the blue figure of Vajrapani, representing the enlightened body, speech, and mind that is inseparable from the guru. So that is a very, very Reader's Digest version of those last figures we have. And I think I've enjoyed being with you. Sorry for not having managed the time only a little bit more skillfully than last time. But I'd like to say, if there's any questions that you have, such as the question about the merit field, where we can find more about that. If any of you have questions like that, and you don't have a way of getting an answer from where you are, though I know there are many people related to your centers who have much more knowledge than I do about these things. If you want to write me, I'm very, very happy to receive your email. And to the extent that I know the answer or where you can find the answer, I would be happy to send it back. So again, my name is Jonathan Landaw. And the one thing to keep in mind is Landau ends in a W, which is unusual. Usually the name Landau ends in a U, but that's not the case in my family. So Jonathan Landaw with a W at gmail.com. And I'd be very, very happy to receive your questions or your comments or your observations. And I hope that before too long we have an opportunity to be connected with one another again. So now I think there is a possibility that the people on at least some of the people on this Zoom connection are familiar with how at this center in Taos, you like to do the dedication at the end. So I would leave the leading of the dedication prayers to whoever feels like leading it. I can't call out your name because I don't know who you are. Eloise, did you want to do that?
Yeah, we do have the list of the dedication list for some specific people. And I'll read that and then perhaps you would kindly give us a bigger picture dedication.
Thank you.
But our specific list for people suffering obstacles, Kavji Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Sue and John, Randy and Jane, Jack and Vicky, Tariq and Tamara, Sonia, Joe T, Matt and wife, Jamie K, Maya and sons, Nell and Brian, Adrian, Jane, Siri Khalsa, Jiwan Khalsa, Sarib Jat, Amanda, Deb, Bill, Mary Jo, and all the others who have lost their homes or been displaced by the fires in our area.
And I'd
And
like to add, sorry, I'd like to
Well,
add
no,
Alyssa. Thank you.
Okay.
you.
Alyssa. And of course, all those that are also displaced by wars around the world. For those suffering illness, John S., Betty K., Una the cat, Dutch, Siri Khalsa, Tom, Patty, John B., and those who have died recently, Venerable Churchman from New Zealand.
Was there anything more, Eloise?
No, no, that's it on our list. Thank you.
So our teachers strongly recommend that at the conclusion of any even slightly virtuous action we may have engaged in, we dedicate that energy that was generated by our thoughts, words, and deeds, dedicated the same way that the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, the past, present, and future, have dedicated, are dedicating, and continue to dedicate the meritorious actions of the meritorious karma of their virtuous actions, so that all beings may be released from their mental and physical sufferings in samsara. So that His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Kebche Zopa Rinpoche, and all teachers from every tradition, from all traditions, revealing true paths leading to higher rebirth, liberation, and enlightenment, may have long and fruitful lives, so that we ourselves may come under the benevolent care of such compassionate Mahayana gurus in this and in all future states of existence, so that we ourselves can achieve the full awakening of enlightenment as swiftly as and completely as possible, in order to repay the infinite kindness we've received from each and every being. And in that way, making our life and the lives of those that we come in contact with truly meaningful and beneficial. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. So thank you for your incredible patience. I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, John. That was
Thanks,
really
John.
lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night and stay well.